Merry Christmas, written by USA Today bestselling author Lexy Timms, copyright 2023 by Lexy Timms, narrated by Kathleen Starr Hall. Chapter 21, December 21st. Blair woke up to the sound of a crackling fire. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the light. From the pearly glow of the enormous, stately bedroom, it was early morning, a little after sunrise. As her eyes adjusted to her surroundings, she didn't need to turn around to look at Coulson to know that he was there. His muscular arm was circled around her, making her feel safe and protected. Stretching underneath the luxurious duvet, she edged closer to him and discovered that he was wide awake, his free hand holding the vintage copy of A Christmas Carol he'd purchased weeks earlier. "You're awake," he said, leaning in to press a kiss to her forehead. "Good morning. Are you reading?" she asked, nodding towards the book. "I wanted to, but somehow it didn't feel right to start reading without you," he replied, his voice low and gravelly. "I know it sounds ridiculous." Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt warm and tingly all over. "It's not ridiculous," she said earnestly, because even though it was difficult to put into words, she understood exactly what he meant. For some reason, Blair couldn't imagine doing anything without him now, not even something as simple as sleeping or reading, and there was a chance that he might feel the same way. Considering the possibility was almost more than her heart could bear, how could she possibly hope to embark on something like this when she had never done it before? At her age, she really should have experienced such intense feelings already. These were the sort of emotions she ought to have gotten out of the way in her youth so that she could grow up and become too serious for such things. Problem was, her heart didn't seem the least bit inclined to move at any schedule but its own. All her sensible plans were now irrelevant. Age was irrelevant, as were her years of insisting that she didn't want to fall under the spell of the town's stupid traditions. But then, maybe she'd been right all along. If she had decided to give in to her family's demands and settle for the first guy who came along, she never would have been able to open her heart to Coulson. Open her heart. Against her better judgment, that was exactly what she had done. And now, she was so happy here with him that she was terrified of testing what they had. 2 nights might have been enough for Coulson, but they'd never be enough for her. While it was obvious he had strong feelings for her, she didn't know if those feelings were as intense as hers. "You know, some people read A Christmas Carol out loud during the holidays," she said. "It's a tradition." "You'd get bored out of your mind if I read the whole thing to you," he said. She wrapped her arms around his wide shoulders. "Your voice is way too sexy for me to ever get bored with it." He chuckled. "How about a chapter later?" "That would be wonderful," she responded, pulling him towards her. "Now that you're awake, I've got a surprise to show you." He smiled, a glint in his eye. Oh, she was curious about what he had in store for her, and yet she wanted to savor this moment just a little longer. "Kiss me first," she ordered gently. His smile widened, turning into a devilish grin, and then Coulson pressed his mouth to her cheek. That warmed her up. Suddenly, he was raining her with kisses. First her cheek, then her mouth, followed by her neck, then her jawline. Blair started giggling as he kept kissing her. When he stopped to stare into her eyes, she felt her face flush so much that she almost forgot that he had something to show her. "What's the surprise?" she managed to ask, her voice quivering as she tried not to get lost in his startling green eyes. "You're going to have to get out of bed to really see it," he told her. She raised an eyebrow. "What are you up to?" "You'll see." Coulson climbed out of bed, the mattress moving with the weight of his muscular body. He was dressed in nothing but his boxer briefs, the sight of his exposed chest and thighs making her mouth water. She remembered being in the throes of passion underneath that body last night. Face heating, his state of undress reminded her that she had nothing on, so she clutched the duvet even tighter to her naked body. "Shy?" he asked, noticing her movement. "A little," she admitted. This was her first time in his bedroom, and she was acutely aware of what a big step that was. She was also aware of the way he was looking at her, with a possessive hunger that made her pulse race. That excited her, and made her feel timid all at once. There was nothing so overpowering about how blatant his desire was. It had been a long time since she'd felt this attractive to anyone, this desirable. Blair had been buttoned up for so long that freeing herself was going to take some getting used to, a process she enjoyed despite her shyness. How could she ever get tired of a man looking at her like that? You don't have to be shy. Your body is perfect, he told her. And if it wasn't perfect? She asked. Your body would be perfect no matter what it looked like, he told her. It's perfect because it's yours. Oh, the things those words did to her heart. Coulson paused. Hang on. After ducking into what must have been the adjacent bathroom, he reemerged, dressed in a vest, a fresh robe in his hand. I hate to see you cover up, but here you go. She took the robe gratefully. While she slipped into the robe, Coulson grabbed his jeans off the floor and put them on. The robe was so huge that it swallowed her up as she got out of bed. Clearly it belonged to Coulson because the hem was practically trailing on the floor. Despite the immense size of the robe, the fabric was soft against her skin, and it had a lemony fresh scent that invigorated her. Noticing that she was dressed, Coulson reached out to take her hand. Come with me, he said gently. She did as instructed, walking barefoot across the plush carpet towards the glass double doors that led to the balcony on the other side of the bedroom. On her way to the doors, she walked past the fireplace, now cheerily lit, the open fire giving off a warm glow. Blair had never been in a bedroom big enough to have a fireplace of its own, and it was then she truly noticed the opulence of her surroundings. The vaulted ceiling, the curtains over the king-size bed's headboard, the shelves full of books, a sitting area next to windows with closed drapes, the footstools at the foot of the bed, not to mention the expensive chandelier hanging over the sitting area. When they got to the double doors, Blair stopped with a gasp. Through the glass she could see the grounds outside. From the shrubs down below to the tall evergreens that towered over the property, everything was covered in a glistening layer of snow. The whole world was blanketed in it. The snow was so beautiful and untouched that it all looked like a picture postcard, a perfect winter wonderland. She couldn't imagine how he could possibly sell the place. But she knew that was the plan, so she'd focus on enjoying it with him while she still had the chance. It's so beautiful, she said, peering through the glass. He wrapped his arm around her. Pretty great surprise, huh? She snuggled against him. You know, today is the first official day of winter. It is? Well, how about that? Everything looks so peaceful, she said, releasing a contented sigh. There was a tranquil yet aching beauty to the landscape as the snow-capped mountains dominated the background. Wish I got to spend winters here as a kid, but we mostly visited Opal during the summer, so I missed out on snowfall like this. And even though I've been jogging on the property all month, there hasn't been any snow except for what's on the mountains, he said, gesturing to the landscape in the distance. Snow gets pretty messy in the big city. Not like this. A thought occurred to her. You spent your summers here in Mislin Bush? Do you think it's possible that we met as kids? Maybe we did, he said with a smile. For all we know, we could have bumped into each other during those summers without even realizing. That notion warmed her heart. The possibility that they were meant to be right from the start. How fanciful. Totally unlike her, and yet the holidays were a time to be fanciful, a season to be hopeful against all odds. After all, this holiday had brought Coulson and his father together. Although that wasn't perfect, that was a shift, a sign that even the most estranged people could find a way back to each other. Plus, his father was safe. Yet another miracle. There had been so many Christmas miracles this year, kissing someone under the mistletoe being the biggest surprise. So, with all those miracles and surprises, maybe they had met back when they were children. Either way, they'd been granted a gift right now, which wasn't something she would waste. Well, since this is your first winter here, we should go and see the snow up close, she suggested. That's right. You haven't seen the grounds, have you? He stopped. But what about work? In all her excitement to be with him, she had totally forgotten about the shop. Luckily, a backup plan was forming in her mind. I'm going to ask Nancy to mind the store. Actually, I think with the store doing well, I can afford to hire her on a permanent basis. That way, I'll have an assistant to help out while we grow. Sounds like a good investment, he said with approval. She smiled. I'll text her and then I can spend the rest of the morning with you. How does that sound? That makes the surprise even better, he said, returning her smile, because now I can take you on a tour during the first snow of the season. After Blair enlisted Nancy to take over her store, they both showered and ate breakfast together. Then Coulson led Blair outside to the snow-covered grounds. Although the view from his bedroom was spectacular, she'd been right about coming out here. Nothing compared to marching out into the freshly fallen snow, though he realized he would have to shovel the snow from the front entrance pretty soon. Acknowledging that he'd have to handle the snow himself reminded him that the last time he'd done much manual labor had been on his visits to the mansion when he was growing up. Out here, he was starting to see that there were drawbacks to being too wealthy and too busy to work with his hands. Not to mention, all that time spent in the office had meant he'd missed out on seeing nature. His regular morning jogs were good for getting fresh air, even when he went running through his upscale Boston neighborhood. But exercise had been the extent of his exploration of the grounds during this trip to Mislin Bush. Luckily, Blair was here to help him rectify that oversight. He'd actually get the chance to stop and really take in his surroundings. "You've never seen the lake, have you?" he asked her. Her eyes went wide with interest. "What? There's a lake?" "I'm exaggerating. It's more of a big pond, but yeah, it's just through those evergreens," he said, pointing to the grove of towering spruce trees. "I'd love to see it," she said excitedly. Smiling, he took her hand in his, then veered away from the snow-covered path to walk in the direction of the trees. They trudged through the snow, slowly moving deeper into the grove. Finally, they came out the other side to the clearing in front of the frozen pond. "Wow!" She squeezed his hand as she stared out at the blue expanse, a look of wonder on her face. "This is the perfect spot for ice skating." "Yeah, it is," he agreed. "I'd have to check it for safety first, of course." "Yes, still, it's so pretty," she said. "I used to go fishing during the summer," he said. "Always wanted my father to join me, but he never did, so I mostly went fishing alone." "I'm so sorry," she said gently, squeezing his hand again. His chest tightened with regret. It would be easy to wallow in self-pity right now. She was giving him the space to talk about his past, and yet, even though it felt easier to share painful truths with her now, Coulson knew that he wanted to enjoy the moment. Time to change the subject. "Bet you guys take advantage of all the untouched snow you get out here," he said. "Oh, well, my brothers sure do," she said in a tone that sounded like a grumble. "They gang up on me and pelt me with snowballs. They're grown men, but they act like children." "Oh, yeah?" Coulson grinned, then reached down to grab a handful of snow off the ground. Blair's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." "Want to wager on that?" The moment the words were out of his mouth, Blair quickly ducked to grab some snow, expertly formed a ball, and hurled it right at him. "What the—" Cold snow hit him in the face. He heard her laughing as she breathlessly said, "Preemptive strike." After wiping the snow off his face, Coulson rushed to make a snowball. Another strike hit him. Damn, Blair was fast. Next thing he knew, she was hurling more snowballs at him. Unwilling to admit defeat, Coulson finally threw the first snowball at her, the snow exploding harmlessly against the lower part of her jacket. Blair laughed again, then clamped a gloved hand over her mouth as she tried in vain to stop. "I think that's 4 snowballs to your 1, she said breathlessly through her laughter. "Is that how this works?" he asked, pausing to gather more snow. "Victory is based on the snowball count?" Mischief flashed in her eyes. "No, it's based on surrender. Yield now, Coulson Bennett." No way was he doing that. Coulson threw his snowball at her, the snowy powder hitting her shoulder. She shrieked, then charged at him, racing into his arms so fast that they both fell off their feet and landed in the soft snow. "Is this a snowball fight or a wrestling match?" he demanded with a laugh. Overtaken by another fit of laughter, Blair struggled to catch her breath. Finally, when she got a hold of herself, she managed to gasp out, "Snowball fight, wrestling contest. Either way, I win." "I'd ask you for a rematch, but it's kind of nice lying in the snow with you," he said. She responded by leaning in to kiss him. He took her hand and turned his head to look at her. The gentle brush of her golden lashes against her rosy cheek captured his attention. From the slope of her cheek, he followed the curve until his eyes landed on her mouth. Blair's lips parted slightly as she inhaled. The sight of her full mouth, still slightly swollen from kissing, was almost too much to resist. Coulson averted his gaze reluctantly. There would be time to kiss her again soon enough. They'd come out here to enjoy the snow, and in order to do that, he was going to have to resist all that temptation. They lay side by side without speaking for a few minutes. Everything was still, almost completely silent except for the sound of her steadily breathing. There was something so easy about being able to embrace the quiet with her. It wasn't awkward, no rush to fill in the silence, just peace. Eventually, she scooted away from him to start moving her arms and legs across the snow. For a second, he didn't know what the hell she was doing until she said, "Snow angels!" "Are we doing a speed run of all the snow-related activities?" he asked her. "Yep. I have to be prepared to keep up with my nieces and nephews. Knowing them, they're going to demand that I take them sledding or something." Blair rose to her feet to admire her work. "Looks pretty good." Coulson got up, shrugging the snow off. "Yeah, looks great. When's the last time you put your skills into making a snowman?" The expression on her beautiful face turning into one of pure delight. Eyes lighting up, she said, "It's been nearly a year since I made one with my nieces and nephews. Let's make one." The smile on her face widened as her cheeks turned an even rosier shade of pink. His suggestion seemed to have given her a second burst of energy because Blair immediately dropped down to her knees to start packing snow between her hands. After about a minute, she must have noticed that he hadn't moved because she paused to look up at him. "Aren't you going to join me? Doing this together is part of the fun." "You're going to have to walk me through this. I haven't made a snowman since I was a kid," he admitted sheepishly. Truth was, Coulson was impressed that a serious businesswoman like Blair also made time to do childhood activities with her nieces and nephews. It showed that she hadn't become jaded by life and work like he was. She still allowed herself to enjoy simple things with her family. Meanwhile, Coulson had lost all that the moment his father decided he was old enough to take part in the family business. Coulson had been working since he was a kid. He'd gotten an internship at Bennett and Company when he was just 16 years old. Other than his connection with his great-grandmother, Coulson hadn't made much effort to bond with his family, mostly because that kind of sentimentality was discouraged among the Bennetts. But seeing how determined Blair was to spend quality time with the people she cared about had changed Coulson. He'd come to Mislin Bush hoping to experience the Christmas traditions he'd missed out on all these years, but now he was realizing that hope wasn't just to heal the part of him that didn't get much of a childhood. The holidays weren't just about him and what he wanted. Christmas was also about forming connections with people, which was something he desperately needed after a lifetime of being a loner. He'd been a loner even among his own friends and family, and now he was certain that it was no way to live. Why have friends if every interaction was about networking and moving up the corporate ladder? What was the point of having a successful family business if the family part always came last? Blair paused to pack the snow together. "I'm going to need your strength to roll this into a bigger ball," she explained. "Join me and I'll teach you everything I know." "My strength and your brains, huh?" "My strength defeated you in the snowball fight," she reminded him. "Did it, though?" He crouched down beside her, close enough to catch the flowery scent of her shampoo. "Pretty sure I won. I mean, I beat you so bad you charged at me in rage." She threw her head back and laughed, the husky sound beautiful and powerful enough to make his heart clench. "Since neither of us wants to concede, I think our snowball fights are going to require a referee from now on." Coulson's heart stopped beating at her offhand mention of the future. She was thinking about them spending time together long after this, beyond their 2 nights together, maybe even beyond Christmas. He realized that pressing her about the future would dim the mood right now, and they were both too happy for such a serious topic, especially if it turned out he had misread the signals. No, this wasn't the time for a heavy conversation. This was the time to build a snowman with her and hope like hell that he was going to get a real shot with her. They worked on the snowman for the better part of an hour, the pair of them even racing back into the mansion to find a battered old hat, a scarf, a carrot, and some buttons to complete the look. With their work almost done, Coulson put the hat onto the snowman's head. "Not bad," he said, as they took a step back to look at the tall but slightly lopsided snowman. "We should name him," she said. "How about Waffles?" Blair laughed. "Waffles? That's a name for a cat, not a snowman." "Okay, Mr. Waffles." More laughter. "Professor Waffles," he suggested. She leaned against him to continue laughing, the warmth of her body awakening something in him. All right. You've talked me into it. Professor Waffles it is." Coulson grinned, wrapping his arms around her as he kissed her forehead. At the exact moment, her phone pinged. "Oh, something tells me that's Nancy texting," Blair said, pausing to retrieve her phone and look at the screen. "Yep, it's an SOS from Nancy. A minor emergency at the Comfort and Joy coffee shop means that she's going to have to leave the store unattended." "Go on ahead," he told her. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He couldn't very well caution her about the pitfalls of owning a small business if he was going to encourage her to make the wrong decision. Besides, they'd agreed to a second night together. "See you tonight?" She smiled, color rising in her cheeks. "Yes. Keep the bed warm for me." Then she pressed her lips to his and tugged at his hand. "I'll walk you out," he said, understanding without needing an exchange of words. They no longer needed to speak to communicate. Maybe they never had. Coulson kept his arm wrapped around her until they were back inside the warm mansion, where Blair quickly grabbed her stuff and left with a kiss and a promise to return that night. As her car drove away, he felt an ache rise in his chest, proof that he hated seeing her go. He could no longer bear her absence, and now that he understood why, all he could do now was spend the rest of the day counting the hours until she came back.